I think my mother did exactly the right thing. I think it's absolutely extraordinary.
The room did not erupt when Princess Anne delivered the words that could permanently alter the balance of power inside the monarchy. It fell completely silent. King Charles stopped moving. Camilla's expression hardened, and the Princess Royal, refusing to soften her voice or withdraw her accusation, looked directly across the table and declared, "Camilla will never lead this family." It was not a private complaint. It was a line drawn before the entire royal household. Before we go deeper into what this really means for the royal family, make sure to subscribe so you don't miss a single update. Charles knew the private council room had been chosen to prevent spectacle, yet the silence felt more dangerous than scandal. Senior family members had gathered to discuss how responsibilities might be coordinated whenever the king could not manage every demand. The proposed structure would have allowed Camilla to guide senior family decisions. That mattered because coordination meant influence over access, priorities, and whose voice reached the monarch first. Anne ended the illusion of agreement. She interrupted the briefing before approval and rejected it in front of William, Edward, Sophie, and the courtiers. "Camilla will never lead this family," she repeated. The Princess Royal, the title traditionally held by the monarch's eldest daughter, did not shout. Her calmness made the words strike harder. Charles gripped the table's edge. Anne had challenged his judgment as sovereign and his loyalty as a husband in the same breath. Yet he offered no defense. Camilla pushed her chair back and asked whether the declaration was a threat. The princess answered only with a stare, leaving the queen consort to face humiliation made worse by her husband's silence. Anne then placed a sealed briefing folder before them. A briefing folder is a protected collection of papers prepared for confidential royal decisions, and this one carried evidence she said went beyond personal dislike. The family had already witnessed choices being made without the direct heir's knowledge. William noticed a handwritten reference on the cover and recognized it from private correspondence linked to Camilla's proposed role. Charles slowly removed his glasses and placed them beside the untouched papers. He asked Anne to repeat herself. She did, without changing her tone, while Camilla watched him for the defense that did not come. The king ordered the meeting paused, but Anne refused to surrender the folder. She warned that her declaration was only the beginning, and the reason behind it would be harder for him to hear. But Anne's declaration could not be understood through one sentence alone, because every person in that room had arrived carrying a different fear, and Camilla's fear was the most personal of all. For King Charles, the confrontation was not simply about who should control royal meetings or guide the family during a crisis. It was about two women who represented entirely different parts of his life. Anne carried the authority of shared blood, childhood duty, and decades of unquestioned service. Camilla carried the emotional loyalty for which he had sacrificed public approval. Now both women were waiting for him to choose, and silence was becoming a choice of its own. Anne had built her authority through discipline rather than closeness to power. As Princess Royal, the title traditionally given to the monarch's eldest daughter, she had spent decades placing service above comfort, believing leadership had to be earned through restraint and accountability. Camilla stood in a more fragile position. Her marriage placed her beside the crown, but her influence over the family still depended heavily on Charles defending it. The king felt betrayed. Anne had challenged his wife before William and senior courtiers, instead of speaking to him privately. To him, that choice felt deliberate, almost cruel. Yet the future king carried a different emotion. William felt sympathy for his father, but also relief that someone had voiced concerns he had buried, especially fears about decisions affecting Catherine and his children. Sophie leaned toward Edward after the meeting was suspended, and quietly explained that Anne had requested 2 private conversations with Charles before the confrontation. Both requests had been redirected through Camilla's office. The Duke of Edinburgh, Charles's younger brother, and a senior working royal, did not immediately condemn the declaration. His silence unsettled the queen consort almost as deeply as William's refusal to promise he would accept her authority. Camilla finally understood that Anne might not be standing alone. The princess had spoken for herself, but the room's hesitation suggested wider support. Later, She told Sophie that the sealed folder contained proof of a boundary crossed during a family ceremony. That moment, Anne warned, involved William's future role and had happened in full view of everyone present. Charles left the council room, carrying anger he could no longer separate from doubt. Camilla caught him alone in the corridor and asked, "Do you believe her?" He paused for several seconds before answering that he needed to know what was inside Anne's folder. Her face changed immediately because she understood what he had not said. He had not defended her. He had not called the accusation false. The threat to Camilla's authority had not begun inside that council room. It had begun weeks earlier, during one ceremony where a single command exposed exactly how far she intended to reach. Long before Anne's words shook Buckingham Palace, there had been another silence, one witnessed by only a small circle of royals, during what should have been a routine family ceremony. Camilla had stepped forward, changed an order approved by William, and expected everyone present to obey. Most did. Anne did not. From that instant, the Princess Royal became convinced that the issue was no longer influence, etiquette, or rivalry. It was a quiet attempt to establish command. Tension had already been building around proposals, allowing Camilla's household to coordinate family appearances, charity announcements, ceremonial seating, and internal communications whenever Charles reduced his schedule. Anne had tolerated the arrangement because it was presented as temporary administrative support, not a transfer of leadership. That distinction mattered. Assistance kept the monarchy functioning. Command placed senior royals beneath an authority they had never accepted. The breaking point came at Windsor Castle during a private ceremony honoring long-serving royal staff. Catherine had been approved by William as the principal speaker. Her address had been prepared, checked, and timed. Moments before she was due to speak, Camilla ordered an aide to remove it and replace it with a statement issued under the Queen's authority. William confronted the aide quietly, but Camilla stepped between them. She said family visibility would now be coordinated from the center. The phrase sounded administrative, yet everyone understood its weight. Catherine remained composed. Anne watched her fold the unused speech carefully and place it inside her handbag, preserving dignity while the program moved forward without her. Charles allowed the altered ceremony to continue. He may have wanted to avoid humiliating his wife publicly, but Anne saw something more troubling. By refusing to reverse the order, the king had allowed a temporary system to overpower the direct heir's decision. Her anger mixed with disappointment because silence had once again protected peace at the cost of clarity. The evidence arrived by mistake. A senior secretary accidentally sent Anne a draft leadership schedule, listing Camilla as the approving authority for engagements involving William, Catherine, Edward, and Sophie. A leadership schedule is an internal plan showing who controls decisions and permissions. The document had been prepared before the Windsor incident, proving the interruption was not spontaneous. Anne copied the schedule and gathered the related correspondence. In a quiet antechamber, she found Catherine's folded speech on a side table and noticed handwritten changes prepared especially for the staff being honored. She asked why it had never been delivered. Catherine answered simply, "The Queen changed the order." Anne's jaw tightened as Camilla's applause continued beyond the closed door. That discarded speech became the symbol Anne could not forget, and when she finally faced Camilla again, she brought more than anger, she brought proof. No aides stood between them. No cameras waited outside. No monarch sat at the head of the table to soften the language or end the exchange. Princess Anne entered Camilla's private sitting room, carrying the copied schedule and Catherine's unused speech. She placed both on the table and asked one question. When did helping my brother become ruling his family? Camilla did not retreat. She closed the door herself and prepared to answer. Anne had demanded the meeting because Charles could not decide the family's future, while the central accusation remained buried beneath rank and resentment. Camilla entered believing her position as queen gave her authority to coordinate royal activity whenever the king needed support. To her, coordination meant stability. To the princess, it had already become command. Anne accused her of confusing closeness to the monarch with power over the heir. William, she warned, could not be managed like a member of Camilla's private household. His future role carried its own authority, and any attempt to control Catherine's appearances without his approval weakened the succession itself, the planned transfer of the crown from one monarch to the next. Camilla's restraint cracked. She said Anne had never accepted her place beside Charles and was hiding an old personal judgment behind concern for constitutional order. The Queen Consort insisted she had spent years being blamed for every fracture, yet was now condemned for trying to make the family function. Anne opened the copied schedule and pointed to the line naming Camilla as final approving authority over Catherine's engagements. She asked why neither William nor the palace secretary, the senior official responsible for formal royal administration, had authorized it. Camilla admitted approving the draft. Then she delivered the answer that changed the confrontation. Charles, she claimed, had encouraged her to give stronger direction during his reduced schedule. Anne's anger shifted into suspicion. If that was true, the king had allowed the arrangement. If it was false, his words had been stretched into a claim of leadership. The princess produced another page. Charles's private instructions existed in writing, and they granted temporary administrative support, not authority over William, Catherine, Edward, or Sophie. Camilla lifted Catherine's folded speech, glanced at the handwritten notes, and called it a program adjustment. Anne took it gently from her hand, laid it flat on the table, and said, "No. It was a warning. You simply did not realize who was watching." Neither woman raised her voice after that. They no longer needed to. The confrontation left both women shaken, but it also forced the most dangerous question into the open. What had Charles truly authorized, and who had expanded his words into a claim of leadership? The answer was hidden inside a short private instruction dictated by King Charles during a period of exhaustion. It asked Camilla to assist with scheduling, maintain continuity, and prevent unnecessary pressure from reaching his desk. It did not name her head of the family. It did not give her authority over William, and it did not permit her to overrule Catherine. Yet somewhere between the king's request and the queen's office, assistance had been transformed into command. Charles gathered Anne, William, Camilla, Edward, and the private secretary to examine the original instruction beside the expanded leadership schedule. A private secretary is the senior official who manages confidential royal business and ensures the monarch's decisions are carried out accurately. The king's wording was practical, even ordinary. He had wanted routine matters filtered during periods when his energy and availability were limited. He had not intended to redraw the family's chain of authority. Charles felt the shame before anyone accused him. His vague words had created space for courtiers to build a structure affecting his son and daughter-in-law. Camilla heard him state that he had never authorized her office to approve William's decisions, and the sentence struck like abandonment. She asked why he had never corrected the officials who treated her as the central authority. The king had no easy answer. His silence had allowed assumption to harden into power. The private secretary then confirmed that Camilla's senior aide had inserted the phrase, "final family coordination," into the internal schedule, without approval from the heir. William remained still. Anne did not. She produced a documented account showing that the alteration followed a private conversation between the queen consort and the aide. Camilla insisted the phrase reflected operational necessity, not an attempt to replace William's position. She argued that someone had to make decisions when Charles could not. Anne answered that necessity did not create authority, especially when Catherine's voice had been removed and the future king's approval ignored. William listened without interrupting, until his father asked whether he had felt overruled. The prince answered carefully, "I felt Catherine was expected to disappear whenever someone else found her presence inconvenient." Charles lowered his eyes. Protocol had been damaged, but the deeper wound was personal. His effort to protect himself from pressure had placed pressure directly upon his son's family. The king lifted his fountain pen and drew a line through the words, "Final family coordination." The scratch of the nib became the only sound in the room. Camilla watched the ink cross through the authority she believed had already become hers. One line had been removed from a schedule, but its consequences could not be erased. and by the following morning, the first visible signs of Camilla's lost control had already begun. Royal authority rarely vanishes with a dramatic announcement. It disappears through cancelled briefings, altered seating plans, unanswered calls, and doors that no longer open. By sunrise, Camilla's office had been removed from 3 planning chains. William's household received direct control over its own engagements. Anne was asked to supervise family coordination temporarily, and the Queen, seated alone with her morning papers, realized the monarchy had begun moving around her. Charles formally withdrew Camilla's office from approving engagements involving William, Catherine, Edward, Sophie, and Anne. A revised palace directive, a written instruction governing how royal households must work, ordered each senior office to communicate independently. The Princess Royal would step in only when a genuine family dispute required mediation. The change looked administrative, but its meaning was unmistakable. Influence had been taken away without ceremony, and trust had been returned to those who believed it had been quietly seized. Camilla received the directive at breakfast. She read the first page twice, removed her glasses, and asked whether Charles had signed it personally. When her secretary said yes, she folded the paper with trembling hands and dismissed the room. Later, she asked the king whether the arrangement was temporary. He refused to say that it was. The queen consort accused him of allowing Anne to punish her. Charles felt the weight of her anger, but he answered that confidence could not be commanded through marriage. His wife heard judgment, he heard consequence. Their pain came from different places, yet neither could escape the fact that his signature had isolated her more completely than Anne's declaration ever had. Camilla's senior aide was reassigned after admitting the expanded schedule had circulated without the required approvals. The confession removed one layer of uncertainty, but it did not restore what had been lost. Every altered program and redirected message now looked like evidence of a system that had moved too far. Catherine received a different letter. She was invited to deliver the staff address previously removed, this time with Charles and William present. At the restored Windsor ceremony, she unfolded the same speech Anne had preserved. Before speaking, the Princess of Wales looked toward her. The royal aunt gave one small nod, while the prince watched with visible gratitude, and the king remained still beside Camilla's empty chair. Afterward, Anne approached William alone. She told him she had never wanted to lead the family herself. She had spoken because he was delaying responsibility that already belonged to him. The future king understood the warning immediately. Catherine's restored voice marked the end of one struggle, but Anne knew restoration was not enough. The future required William to decide whether he was finally prepared to lead. The turning point did not occur before courtiers, secretaries, or advisors. It came inside a small Windsor drawing room where Princess Anne and William sat without aides, briefing folders, or prepared statements. She did not congratulate him on Catherine's restored speech. She did not criticize Camilla again. Instead, Anne looked at the future king and told him the truth she believed no one else would say plainly. This happened because you were waiting for permission to protect your own family. Anne explained that her declaration had never been an attempt to seize leadership or destroy Camilla publicly. She had acted to stop an undefined power structure before habit turned it into something permanent. William understood the danger, but he admitted why he had remained cautious. He feared widening the divide with Charles and appearing to exploit the king's reduced strength for his own advantage. The princess refused to let that explanation become an excuse. Restraint, she told him, could become surrender when silence allowed Catherine to be diminished and his future duties redirected. William lowered his voice and admitted that guilt had followed him since Windsor. He had watched his wife fold away a speech prepared with care, yet he had chosen private protest over public defense. Anne then revealed that she had warned Charles months earlier. In a documented private meeting, she had told her brother that William's household must never be placed beneath Camilla's approval. The king postponed the discussion, hoping tension would fade. Instead, delay allowed the disputed schedule to move closer to formal approval. Her explosive statement in the council room had therefore been deliberate. The princess needed to force an immediate decision before an internal arrangement became accepted authority. She had not spoken because she wanted command. She had spoken because no one else was stopping the transfer. William asked whether she truly believed Camilla could never lead the family. Anne answered carefully. The Queen Consort could stand beside Charles, support him, and serve the crown with dignity. But she could not inherit the authority of the bloodline or command the heir. That boundary, Anne insisted, protected both William's future and Camilla from expectations she could never safely fulfill. The princess reached across the table and slid Catherine's folded speech toward him. She told the prince to keep it as a reminder of what silence costs. William placed his hand over the pages and promised that no one would remove her voice again. With Anne's warning finally understood, William entered the next meeting not as an injured son seeking approval, but as the future monarch prepared to define the family's boundaries himself. By midday, the palace could no longer contain the shock. A carefully written statement confirmed that leadership of the wider royal family would remain with the sovereign and the direct heir, while the Queen would continue supporting Charles without authority over separate royal households. It did not repeat Anne's devastating sentence. It did not need to. Across Britain, broadcasters, newspapers, and crowds immediately understood that the Princess Royal had forced the monarchy to define a boundary it had avoided for years. The palace clarified that William's household would recover direct control over its engagements, communications, and ceremonial decisions. Anne would serve only as a temporary mediator when serious disagreements arose. A mediator is someone who helps opposing sides reach agreement without taking permanent command. Courtiers called the decision an administrative adjustment, but the language said something far sharper. Camilla would not direct the Prince and Princess of Wales. Charles watched the coverage in private and felt every headline strike at his marriage. Commentators described the announcement as a public defeat for his wife, reducing a painful family correction to a contest of winners and losers. The king knew the decision was necessary, yet necessity did not protect him from sorrow. Camilla refused to watch at first. Hours later, she turned on the television alone and heard Anne praised for defending the line of succession, the established order determining who inherits the crown. The Queen Consort listened as broadcasters praised duty, restraint, and courage, while her own years of service were compressed into one accusation of overreach. The crisis widened when a palace correspondent disclosed that Catherine's prepared Windsor address had been removed. A ceremony once hidden from public view now became proof that the conflict had involved more than scheduling. It had touched dignity, authority, and the future of the monarchy. William responded through a documented palace statement. He thanked Anne for her clarity, service, and loyalty, signaling unmistakable support without attacking Camilla. His restraint prevented the crisis from becoming a family execution, but it also showed where he stood. The Crown Chronicle captured the public mood the following morning. Its front page carried Anne leaving Buckingham Palace beneath the headline, "She drew the line." At Windsor, a small crowd applauded as her car passed, while one woman raised a sign reading, "Duty before influence." Camilla lowered the television volume before William's final sentence and whispered that Anne had won. Charles, standing unnoticed in the doorway, answered, "This was never meant to be a victory." The public had already delivered its judgment, but inside the palace one final verdict remained. The family had to decide whether Anne's words would leave permanent bitterness or establish a boundary they could finally accept. The final meeting began without raised voices. There was no folder slammed onto the table, no accusation thrown across the room, and no attempt to pretend the previous days had not changed the family. Charles sat beside Camilla. William sat beside Catherine. Anne remained alone between them, not as a ruler or rival, but as the person who had forced everyone to confront the truth. The monarchy could survive wounded feelings. It could not survive uncertainty over who carried its future. Charles confirmed that Camilla's role would remain one of support to the sovereign, charitable service, and representation. She would not lead William, Catherine, Anne, Edward, or Sophie. The sovereign is the reigning monarch, and standing beside him did not create authority over the heir. The king withdrew the disputed proposal permanently. William accepted responsibility for directing his household and preparing for the duties of the heir. He admitted that caution had become delay, allowing others to define boundaries he should have defended. Catherine's position would now be protected by authority rather than reassurance. Charles then faced the failure beneath the crisis. His desire to shield Camilla from rejection had made him avoid limits, placing his wife in a role the family would never accept. The queen consort told Anne that the public declaration had humiliated her. Yet she understood why the arrangement could not continue. She did not apologize for supporting Charles, but admitted she had overreached. Anne clarified what her statement meant. Leadership could not be created through access, affection, or an internal schedule. It had to follow duty, accountability, and constitutional succession, the lawful order through which the crown passes. Catherine returned the speech to Anne. She said it no longer represented humiliation. It marked the moment the family stopped allowing silence to decide its future. The princess accepted it, then stepped back from mediation because her duty was complete. Camilla rose first, then paused beside Anne. "You could have destroyed me," she said. The princess answered, "I was trying to stop this family from destroying itself." The queen nodded and left beside Charles, not as the family's leader, but as the king's wife. Anne had not won power. She restored responsibility to William, dignity to Catherine, clarity to Charles, and limits to Camilla. Her loyalty was the courage to speak what everyone else feared, and with that final boundary accepted, the family left the room changed but intact, no longer united by silence, but by a clear understanding of where duty, authority, and the future of the crown truly belonged. Thanks for watching. Please don't forget to like and subscribe, and we will see you in next one.